Brian Smith here, and welcome to the Dreampath podcast, where I try to get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. My goal is to demystify and humanize the creative process and make it accessible to everyone. Now let's jump in. Hollis Wong-Wear is on the show today. Based in Los Angeles, Hollis is a multi-talented musician, singer, songwriter, spoken word artist, and public speaker. When Hollis is not writing and composing her own music, she collaborates with individuals and organizations to develop their creative voices and amplify them for social change. Hollis is a member of the band Flavor Blue, a Seattle-based electronic R&B trio.
I got skyscrapers staring 'cause I'm going up. 700 floors ain't high enough.
She's also worked extensively with other artists, including Macklemore and Ryan Lewis. In fact, she was nominated for a Grammy with them for her songwriting and vocals on their 2012 album, The Heist. In this interview, Hollis talks about how she got involved in the making of that album and how she came to write and perform the hook on the song White Walls. She also talks about what the Grammy nomination did for her career and what it didn't do. Whenever possible, I like to conduct these interviews in the creative space of my guest, ideally in their home, studio, or workspace. And Hollis was so kind to invite me into her home recording studio for this talk. I had a great time getting to know her, hearing about her journey into music, and found her to be extremely bright, articulate, and charismatic. If you go to the show notes for the episode on the Dreampath website, you'll find a YouTube link to a TEDx talk she did in 2016, which shows how much stage presence and charisma she has. She's a natural storyteller and a truly gifted musician and artist. So I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging talk with Hollis Wong-Wear. Well, Hollis, thanks for talking to me and inviting me into your home and your studio. We're here in Los Angeles, California, and we're going to talk about your career and your journey into the arts.
Awesome.
Yeah. So when did you come to Los Angeles?
I came to LA in July of 2015. So yeah, drove my Honda Accord down from Seattle and moved into a tiny little room in Highland Park. And then I've been here in East Hollywood for 3.5 years.
What brought you here?
I think a few factors influenced my decision to move to LA. I had been in Seattle for almost 10 years, and I had a really incredible time growing as an artist in a way that I never would have anticipated had I been asked to predict it when I had moved to Seattle to go to Seattle University in 2005. I really never thought like an independent, I never thought a musical career was possible for me, let alone like what even an independent music career meant. But I think after 10 years in Seattle, there was a couple of factors. One, I think I was just personally really ready for a change of scenery, a change of pace, and a new challenge. I think I had gotten really comfortable in Seattle in many ways, and I have such like a rich community there. But I think because I was so comfortable, I wasn't growing as much as I was really wanting for myself as somebody in their late 20s. And then I think secondly, I was really enamored with the idea of being a professional songwriter, and the idea of really like growing my legacy as somebody who like facilitates and creates incredible original music with other people, and for other people and for other artists. And I knew that LA was the only place that I could be to really make that dream come to life. So I kind of moved here like most people do, most creatives do in LA, just with the fledgling dream, and realizing, you know, once you get down here, like what is a dream, interrogating like what it really even means to make your dream come to life. But that was my impetus.
So has it opened things up for you like you thought it would?
Have my dreams come true? You know, it's funny. I think that's like a lot of what I think about and interrogate within myself as I'm down here. I think in LA, the environment down here can feel really isolating. And it is truly like a very, you know, dispersed, decentralized place. And, you know, versus a place like Seattle, where I came from, where everything feels really centralized and really close and really tight knit. And what I kind of realized was like the ways in which I thought success would be crystallized, or the idea of like having a win, like it's all incredibly relative and nebulous. Like anything in life, I think like you have to define it for yourself, and it's not going to just like slap you in the face or give you an award.
Right.
And I think for me, when it's like anything, when you're in it, all you can see is what's ahead. And then when you take a step back and you look at the journey, you realize how much you've ascended, both as a person and in your profession as well. So I'm quite far away from where I want to be as a professional and in my accomplishments as a professional. But taking a step back and looking at what I've been able to accomplish in the last 4 years, I'm really proud of myself. I think what I wanted to manifest was creating a really close, trusting, creative partnership with an artist on the rise who I really believed in, and that I felt like I could help influence and mold, and also obviously like be fed by that collaboration myself. And that has definitely actualized. That has definitely happened. And I've also gained a lot more autonomy in my own creative process while being down here in LA. Like when I moved down here, I needed to have an engineer to like do anything in the studio. And now I'm at a place where I can confidently record demos by myself and create. And I've learned so much about what it means to be an empowered creator when I left LA, that was like kind of not what I was planning on at all. And I think what I've recognized is that creative autonomy and that creative agency and that creative knowledge, like which kind of seeps into like legal knowledge, honestly. Like what does it mean to create original IP and protect your original IP? Like these were not terms that I was thinking of at all when I dared to slingshot myself down here in LA and try to get into as many studios and rooms as possible. My approach is a lot more informed now.
Yeah. So do you find that just being around so many other creatives allows you to learn at an accelerated rate in terms of like the legal issues and the IP issues and things that artists really need in order to survive?
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, honestly, like LA has been this interesting kind of tension between that really rich creative community where people are, down here, it's like to be a working creative is commonplace to, this is a economy that, unlike what I left in Seattle, centers creative, production at the center of its economy. And so it's like you can't run the economy in Los Angeles without creatives, right? And without, writers, without musicians, without directors, without all the folks that make it go. Versus, in Seattle, I felt like what I did as a creative was very much an outlier in the primary economy and the kind of like center of the city. I always felt like I was auxiliary, that I was kind of at the mercy of the success of the tech industry in order to like, should we wait? Oh. Sorry, that's also a thing. I mean, helicopters are a thing anywhere in LA, but I live close to a hospital, so.
Well, I think it adds a lot of character.
Oh, does it add? Oh, really? Yes. Welcome to the war zone.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I was just like, so basically, I think growing or being in Seattle, as an artist, I started feeling like I was kind of at the mercy of the generosity of the economy that I lived in.
Of the tech industry, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean, almost exclusively. I mean, Seattle's become such a company town now. And, in some ways, I was a beneficiary of that. Like I had a band, or I continue to have a band in Seattle called The Flavor Blue. And, we're really, I'd like to think that we're fun in our own right, but we're really great for corporate events. And our corporate event game up in Seattle is great. Like I can't imagine doing the types of corporate events in LA, that we can do up in Seattle. And in some way, the arts are funded up there. But I think for me, as somebody who's interested in having a position of leadership and ownership and agency, I just didn't ever really see myself being able to build it because the infrastructure wasn't there. Versus in Los Angeles, like this city is built on an infrastructure of creative production, and that not even giving like a quality to it, like whether that's like independent creative production or very corporate creative production. But there's a lot of people who identify as working creatives that live here in Los Angeles. And so it's really like comforting and cool to be like a tiny little goldfish, like in this enormous city. Versus like in Seattle, I felt like I was one of a handful of goldfish swimming around in a tiny, pond. But I think, also in LA, like it's been the loneliest place I've ever lived. And, you know, I've had to learn how to really educate myself. And I was really in Seattle, like I came from a place of really rich community where I really was pushed to create because of my community and because of the encouragement of my community. And that all kind of went away when I moved to Los Angeles. Like I'm not like going to the same coffee shop and seeing 20 people that I know that like all love me and are like invested in my success. Like when everybody out here is kind of fending for themselves. And so I had to build up a much stronger sense of self, of creative self. And you know, and then kind of like, I think in LA, like there's just so many kind of missed connections and it's so hard to get places and the culture is kind of a lot. I mean, I hate saying flakier because I feel like that's just like a cop out, but just everybody is just, the hustle is the hustle for everybody and nobody owes you shit. So like,
Right.
and I think like for me, what I've recognized is like, I have to be a much stronger, confident creator in connecting with other people.
Yeah.
And it's been a challenge.
Well, it's interesting how you're putting that because you're actually, your spin on it is, you know, it's a challenge and it allows you to focus in on your specific type of creativity and what your goals are. Totally. So in a way, the geography is affecting how you grow as an artist.
Oh, big time. And I think for me, again, like coming from a city like Seattle, where I felt like such an outlier, where I didn't even really think it was possible to be a professional songwriter the way that I wanted to be, I felt I was in kind of like a rarefied position. And because of my work with Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, I was like, had worked with like the most successful like independent music act to come out of Seattle in like X number of years. So it's like, it was very quantifiable there. Like I had this kind of like, not absolute, but like this relative like accomplishment that I could kind of like hang my hat on or like allow me to leverage up. In LA, like that's not a remarkable success, you know, and like nothing that I do is remarkable at all. In fact, it's like pretty commonplace and like a little boring. So it's like, who are you outside of that, like of your kind of like special title in your small town? And again, obviously Seattle, super rich musical history. And it's such an honor and such a privilege to have been shaped by that city and to be influenced by that city and to continue to call that city home and to continue to be connected to Seattle. You know, I just spent like almost 2 weeks up there and I'm going back again in like 2 weeks to speak through shows and everything. And, you know, I'm really, really thankful to have had, I don't think I would be an independent artist or a songwriter or what have you if it weren't for Seattle. Yeah. But I think also I realized that the infrastructure there was lacking. And so my hope and desire is to be as successful as possible starting from the ground here in LA so that I can invest both my knowledge and my money back into Seattle to help build that type of infrastructure so that artists that are developing in Seattle at the very least have like a better sense of the lay of the land of the music industry and how to operate and navigate within it. If not like giving people the opportunity to stay in Seattle and actually still continue and develop as world-class professionals.
So what do you think that the Grammy nomination did for you or didn't do for you here in Los Angeles? I mean, you mentioned that, you know, the bar is a lot higher here in terms of accomplishments and recognition. But what do you think that Grammy nomination did?
I mean, yeah, I don't want to be dramatic, but like it completely transformed my life. Like I had never been to Los Angeles for like work before Grammy week. And I think like I was shocked when we got nominated. I was shocked when I realized that I was like literally listed on the nomination. Like everything with that experience, so all of it was so unanticipated that it was all just kind of like trying to move through it. But being down here in LA at that week, you know, I got put into writing sessions. So as a songwriter, my focus is lyric and melody. And so what we call that for writing is top lining. So it's like, you can literally think about it, it's like the top line. It's like the line that if you're looking at sheet music, it's usually like whoever's like whatever the lyric and the melody is that the vocalist is singing, that's the top of the line. So usually there'll be producers and then I'll be brought in as a top liner. And I literally had to Google that phrase when the people started asking me like, oh, like you're coming down to LA for Grammy week. Like, do you want to do some top line sessions? And I was like, oh, is that a company, top line? And so I just recognized when I came down here, You know, it was interesting, like being at the Grammys themselves, like I just realized how like also ordinary it was, even as a nominee. Like you're there and I'm sitting in like section 112, like row 14 of Staples Center. Like I'm not like I'm not on the ground floor by any means. Like
Right.
that, you know, whatever. And you know, you're seeing all these people go by and you're recognizing like, okay, even this feels like an insane accomplishment or an insane like accolade, but it's really, again, like kind of commonplace, like who cares? But being down here and doing my first studio sessions where I was coming in as a top liner and people were like, oh, she's nominated for a Grammy this year because of her songwriting, because of her vocal work. And it was a really important affirmation for me, not even because of the nomination, but just because it gave me one single calling card, which ultimately like, again, like isn't as remarkable as it sounds, but it just gave me one in. And the one in is like honestly the most valuable thing that you can ever get as in a city like LA where there's so many people vying to do what you do. And I just fell in love. I was just, you know, I was just pulsing on adrenaline, like not sleeping for like a week, just like so hype. And I was like, oh my God, like, could this be my life? Could I do this for a living? Like, could I actually like this thing that felt like such a fluke and this thing that I felt like I had been like doing despite my best, like what was best for me? Like I realized like, oh, maybe this is what's best for me. Like maybe embracing my passion and my love for songwriting could actually be the thing that makes me successful and not the thing that I'm doing while I'm trying to be successful in another field or another way. And it's when I fell in love with LA, and it's when I fell in love with the idea of being here. And after Grammy week, I like started compulsively coming down to LA. Anytime I had a week in my schedule where I didn't have anything really firmly planned, I'd buy a ticket and I'd come down here and I'd crash on people's couches and I'd get booked up in studio sessions. I was just so like, I was really addicted to the adrenaline rush and the creativity of coming together with strangers and making stuff happen. And yeah, so in that way, it like completely transformed my path and my passion. And it was to the point where like, a year after that, you know, it was a year after the Grammys, and I like looked in the mirror and I was like, by this time next year, I'm going to be living in Los Angeles. Like, there's no, like, I can't let another year go by with me, but like just having this dream lying in wait in another city and me just like dipping my toe into it.
Well, I was going to ask you that question. When you know, what point in your life you realized that this was the thing that you were going to do? And it sounds like Grammy week was probably that week, or at least the week that the time in your life when you realized it was possible.
Totally. And it was like a very, you know, fortunate affirmation. Obviously, not everybody gets like that type of accolade. And even, you know, with every like very credible critique of like the Grammy organization and the Recording Academy and like what awards even mean and like what have you. But it, like, I think for me, what it was, and I don't think it had to have been a Grammy nomination, because like it could have been something else. Like it just like, and it's not even like the nomination wasn't even like a demonstration of demand even. It was just kind of like, I think in music or in any creative field, it's like you have to honor a win. Like I think it's easy to just be like, oh, okay, like this happened, but what's next? And I think for that, like it both really humbled me. Like again, like being at the Grammys, I'm like, ooh, like literally nobody cares. Like I could not be here and it would be totally fine. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
you know, and obviously it was awesome to like give my mom the experience of like my mom was my date and like, you know, we got to walk through the red carpet, but you're on the red carpet and you're like, I'm actually not special at all. Like I am a very ordinary person here, even though I'm like all dressed up and like, you know, I might have access to this thing, but it's like, you know, like who cares? Like, sure. Like you worked on an album that was nominated, like whatever. And so in some ways it was like incredibly humbling because it's like nobody really gave a shit.
Yeah.
But on the flip, like, you know, it gave me the opportunity and the access to come down here and have those first creative sessions and just realize like, oh, okay, there's a whole world here that I could tap into. And it's not just us in our little bubble up in our town where everything feels so new. And, you know, because it was unanticipated, you also don't know if it would ever happen again. And I was like, I'm too like intrigued by the possibility of doing something more.
Yeah.
And I felt like here was the only place that I could do it.
And it sounds like, and it feels like from the way you describe the Grammy nomination and the hustle of Los Angeles, that no matter what accolades you receive, and no matter how cool it is that you were able to collaborate with, awesome musicians and iconic artists, it is always a hustle. I mean, it's like you've got to be creating and making connections and thinking about how to move forward all the time.
Totally. And I think another thing that I've thought about too is like, and people come and people go, especially in the music industry, like disposability is an all-time high. Like you can have, and it's always been that way, right? The one-hit wonder phenomenon, right? The idea that you could actually hit number one on the Billboard charts, or you could have a really successful run at radio, and so few artists experience that, and many artists experience that and then never have it again. So the idea of like hitting a peak at some kind of arbitrary-ish point in your career and then never being able to kind of even remotely replicate that type of success, that's like pretty demoralizing, right? So now on now looking at it, whatever, and just being like, well, I just hope that everybody invested properly so that they actually have something to go off of, because it's hard to know. But I think there's always going to be a hustle. There's always relativity. Like I think, and that's what's, again, kind of refreshing in in Los Angeles, is that like, you have to kind of create your own journey for yourself and determine for yourself what success looks like. What is sustainability as a creative? Like, what does it look like to wake up in the morning and feel really good about yourself? And I think for a lot of working creatives, it's a struggle. And I'm really thankful to have given myself the space and time to experience that. Like I've experienced, I think, some of the lowest creative lows that I've ever felt in LA. But I've also, been surrounded by a room of people who are literally changing like the sound of music and the shape of music and making the most influential like pop and R&B and hip hop music. And I'm in the room as a peer. And so it's like, at the end of the day, like, it's just kind of determinate on how hard you're willing to work for feeling good and feeling strong about what you do. And I think here it's pretty undisputable that like you can reach the highest heights here. All the resources are available to you here. It's not the best environment for everybody, obviously, like anywhere. And I think a lot of people really get either consumed by it, like it's like kind of the quicksand of the soul, or people get really like agitated by it, like I hate this culture, I hate the way that everybody's so flaky, or I hate how like nobody ever leaves their little bubble and like X, Y, and Z. But sometimes that agitation can create really great art.
Yeah. Have you, this is a little off topic here, but have you thought about how to change that culture in Los Angeles, or is it so set in stone that it's just, you're just going to have to deal with it and adapt? Because I was in an Uber yesterday with the driver was from Jordan, and he had been here for 2 years. He was in a master's program for business administration, going to school and, just trying to make a living. I asked him if he had made any friends here, and he said, I have nobody after 2 years. And it kind of, it's just a real bummer to hear that someone can be in a town for 2 whole years and not have a single friend.
Yeah, that's
But I'm just wondering if the culture here in Los Angeles, where everybody's in their own bubble, if there's a change in the tide that you're seeing, where people are trying to create community through changing the infrastructure of towns themselves, or just are you finding your community just in your vocation, which is, the arts?
Sure. Yeah. I think that it's really broad to say like the culture of Los Angeles, or even like the culture of these like 3 blocks that we live on. I think like everybody has their own individualized experience. And like, while I'd say that there's definitely like trends in the way that people socialize and treat each other. And again, like, as I've said, like LA is the loneliest place I've ever lived. But I've actually been taking that loneliness as a gift, like as somebody who myself is like really like compulsively social and loves being within and around community. That loneliness has been really important to my self-development in this new stage of myself as a creative. And yeah, of course, it's like anywhere, you just have to find your people, right? So, I would like all due respect to the folks that there's so many people who are here on the ground doing arts community and have done arts organizing here in LA that, these communities have existed for decades. And oftentimes, like, I think of like Patrisse Cullors, for example, my friend who is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, who like, has a very rich organizing community that she came from as a teenager and now is leading. There's a lot of folks that are not only just like gathering together in community, but are doing really important social impact work. And that's what I've been really inspired by. I think for me, like social impact and social justice work and my identity as an artist have always been really fused. It's like kind of the tradition that I came out of. And so it was a little challenging for me for sure to feel like I had I had really cool friends and like really awesome friends that lived in LA that were all like incredible creatives and incredible professionals, but like there wasn't really that thread tying us all together or having us gather in place versus in Seattle when, we'd all come together for a fundraiser showcase, or there was always like a cause that we were like championing or what have you. But I've recently in the last year been able to kind of find my folks, or at least find folks that are like, I went to an event last or 2 days ago at this gallery space called, I think it's pronounced Nutous. I'm not sure. It's Noustous. And it's like in the heart of Chinatown in LA. And it's this event called Proud Asian Woman. And it's basically this one girl that was like, I realize that Asian American women don't ever come together and talk about our experiences and that. And so it's just a gathering that happens every month. And it's, there was probably like 25 women there. And it was just like really cool to be like, and we're all driving in from the Valley, from Westminster, from like Long Beach, like everybody's coming from like all these like myriad places, which wouldn't even be considered in the same like state in a lot of different places. Like LA is so big. But everybody coming together and just being like, okay, like we're all like cool creatives, like we're all people who are like living our lives and we're just like creating space for community. And there's a lot, what I will say in LA is there's a lot of space. Like there's a lot of space to activate. And then there's a lot of professionals that kind of activate spaces where they're living. So it's just kind of about like creating that through line between like, like we're coming together as creatives to like get a creative project knocked out, and being like, we're coming together as creatives to think about how, to think about our experiences, to shape our social perspectives, and to think about how we can create impact in our communities.
Nice. So how did you find spoken word, and how does it fit into your creative toolkit?
Sure. So I found spoken word through an organization called Youth Speaks, which is based in San Francisco. It was created in San Francisco, and now there's kind of like chapters all across the country. It's like a really incredible nonprofit that created space and support for young poets to develop their original work, perform their original work. And I went when I was like a sophomore, I think in high school, I went to one of their grand slams, which happened like in like, it was the Opera House, right? Or basically where they do opera in San Francisco, like that's where the spoken word poetry slam was for teens. And I went, and it was like the most electrifying night of live performance that I had ever seen. My friend was performing, and I saw just like 12 young people get up there in front of like 2,000 people and just rip and give incredibly captivating performances of their personal experiences and their personal perspectives. And I just like was so in love with it. I had done theater and done choir my whole life, but it was like the first time I had seen, because basically spoken word is original like monologue theater. So, and it was just so captivating to me as a performer. I was like, oh, maybe I could actually write my own script. I don't have to keep like convincingly performing other parts. I could actually be the character. Like I could be the role. I could be the protagonist in the story. When, I loved theater, but I never saw somebody like me like be in the center. Right. So spoken word to me was like such a thrilling idea as a burgeoning creative person. And then also I think the community aspect was really attractive to me too, like feeling kind of, on the outside or feeling kind of weird. Like it was this community of really incredibly confident, incredibly like emotionally intelligent people of incredibly diverse and disparate backgrounds coming together to really like honor each other's stories. And I was like, there's such a power in this. I am so moved. Like I feel so charged up. And I know like, and the slams in San Francisco, it's like, it's thousands of people and it's thousands of adults. It's a lot of like older people that come and because they realize the power and the energy of these young people to truly transform. And so I was really in love with that idea. And it really has been the foundation of my arts practice, of like the way that I approach. I think songwriting is just kind of a permutation of poetry for sure. I mean, it's basically an extension of poetry. And so for me, I think that's the reason why I've come back to this craft and to this art form. And the kind of building blocks of the raw power of live performance of your own story, you know? And like, I think in my journey, I've been like, how can I apply what I learned as a teenager in that community where I felt like so energized and so inspired and so ready to get out and like shift the world with my bare hands. Like, how can I bring that type of vitality to songwriting and to music and to like pop music at that? And I think, you know, it gave me so many tools to approach writing, to basically like writing at Youth Speaks. And then when I moved up to Seattle, I was part of Youth Speaks Seattle, and then actually ended up leading the organization up there for a little bit. And just the idea of coming together with people that you don't know and writing on a same prompt and sharing, just like that simple act of bearing witness to other people's stories and having the opportunity to feel heard and feel seen. Like, it's a truly like revolutionary act, and it's pretty simple to do.
Right. Well, one word I was listening for and I didn't hear was fear or scary. Because those are the words that come to mind when I think about spoken word, because of the vulnerability of being up on stage and you're not showing up with a script. I've never done spoken word, but I've seen it. And to me, it seems like extreme improv, but it's solo and it's raw, and it's like coming from a place that is just where very few people tap into and reveal, you know?
Sure,
so that's what's scary for me. Thinking about doing it myself, I don't know that I could.
Right. Well, I would say like most spoken word experiences aren't improvised. Usually people are like, I'm like trying to think of a time where where like the event was like exclusively like freestyle poetry. But I would argue almost like that would be less vulnerable than the idea of like, you do have a script, but you wrote the script, and if the script sucks, then that's on you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not, you can't blame a writer, you can't blame a director, you can't blame whatever. It's like, that's all you. And I think, you know, when I was younger, it was less scary for me because I was just kind of like, fuck it. Like, I didn't have I think as we get older, we get like more neurotic and just more informed of the consequences of failure and of our actions, and you know, we get a little more freaked out. But I think that's like the power, like if anybody listening has, you know, lives in a city or doesn't, even like in small towns, like going and seeing young people perform, and particularly perform their own poetry, is so inspiring because of that. Our like societal fear hasn't fully developed, I think, when we're teens. I mean, for some it has, but I think like in that place, especially when you feel really emboldened and supported by, you know, community and by the infrastructure of a nonprofit and X, Y, and Z, you know, people step into that brave space a lot easier. And then I think we build those walls as we get older. And I've definitely had to confront that. Like, I look back at my 17-year-old self and I'm like, damn, she was such a badass. And like, and I felt at the time like this, you know, me as a teen, I was just like, oh, like someday I'll be this, or I'll have the confidence to do this, or X, Y, and Z. And I look back now and I'm just like, damn, I wish I could, like, you know, I want to. It's not that I wish and I can't, but my desire is to burrow back and to like really tap into that confidence, that courage. It wasn't even confidence at that point, because I think I was not even that confident, but I was just ready to fling myself courageously into a space, like, and try it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that I've certainly become risk adverse as I have gotten older, and I think we all do, and we avoid flinging ourselves, even if we're not confident. Like, you can be full of fear and fling yourself courageously into a new space. And yeah, I think that like tapping into that youthful space of like, I'm just fucking gonna do it is really important.
So how did you connect with Ryan Lewis and Macklemore?
So when I moved to Seattle, I got a couple of I was just like an indie hip hop fan. I had just been listening to to underground rap music for a really long time. And so when I moved to Seattle, I was asking around like, who are the local rappers? I really want to connect. And a couple of the CDs that I got off top were a band called Blue Scholars, which became like my like absolute like obsessed. I was obsessed, like favorite band. Like it was like all I like memorized their self-titled album in like a matter of days. And then I also got Macklemore's like debut LP that he had just released, The Language of My World. And it was like like there was a couple songs where I was like, this is kind of questionable, but for the most part, like I really loved it and I loved how creative he was.
Is that the one with the city on it, or is that before that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. He's on it. It's yellow. He's like sketched. And yeah. And like, so I had known of him since then. And I had known his music. I had gone and seen him perform. And like, you know, Ben had always like from that point on, like kind of just been a bit of a local celebrity. Like he had been, you know, performing, and people knew of him and he was in the scene. And so I'm trying to think of how it all connected. I think what happened was I started working for Blue Scholars like over a couple years, or something about like I became friends with them or something, like, which was like the coolest thing that had ever happened to me in my life. Was like my favorite band was like actually wanted to be friends with me, and I was like, this is so tight. And through them, I think what happened, my because I ended up being in a rap group, and then I think we opened for Macklemore at one point, but like we didn't really talk, and I think I was like intimidated, and he wasn't sober yet, and so everything was just kind of not a good vibe. And then I think Blue Scholars ultimately, yeah. Okay, so Blue Scholars ended up like the DJ from Blue Scholars' his brother was a music video director, and he and I were talking, and he was like, I'm gonna pitch this music video to Macklemore and Ryan Lewis because they just started making music as a duo. I didn't know Ryan Lewis at the time, and he was like, I'm gonna pitch this song because you know, they're not done with this song yet, but I think it has a lot of potential, but I'm looking for a producer. And I was like, I'll do it. Like I don't even know what being a music video producer means, but like I am down. Like I would love to like get in the room and like be of service and like work with these people, because I was like, I'm inspired by them, whatever. And this was like right after Ben had gotten sober, and like they had released their very first project, and I was just really inspired by like his transformation. So then we came together, and it was like the four of us. It was Zia Mohajir-Jaspi, the director, Macklemore, Ryan Lewis, and me. And the four of us like spent months creating this music video and ultimately this song kind of from scratch and from the ground up. And
White
it was
Walls?
No, the song called Wings.
Oh, okay,
so yeah,
Wings,
it was a song that, and then I like in producing the music video, I ended up actually co-writing the chorus with Ben and Ryan, and then directing a children's chorus to perform
Oh my gosh.
the chorus.
Amazing.
And it was this whole holistic artistic experience. And it was really through that I obviously gained access to them, but also developed like a really close working relationship with them, to the point that when, you know, things started picking up and they were putting together their album, you know, they were like talking about the thrift shop video. And this was, I had worked with them on White Walls, and actually, I guess I'll say this too. Once, we were done with that music video experience and then was working on what would become the Heist, him and I would actually meet up at coffee shops and do writing exercises like the ones that I had gotten from You Speak. So like the idea of getting together and doing free writing sessions. And, you know, I would either like bring some source material, which is like kind of my practice now. Like I'll bring a poem, or I'll bring like lyrics from something and then read them, and then maybe take a phrase from that or like a theme from that, and then just do some like creative free writing for 20 minutes and then share. And I had talked to him about it because, you know, we had some meeting, I think about when we were in pre-production for Thrift Shop, and or no, this was way before. This is way before Thrift Shop was even written. We were doing, I think maybe we were just still in the Wings production thing, and he had kind of been talking to me about the fact that he felt like he was kind of creatively stuck. And I was like, well, you know what I do when I'm creatively stuck is I do free writing. And he was like, okay, well, maybe we could do, like, I actually remember he was like, oh, okay, like maybe I'll hit you up about that. I'm like, okay, let me know. I'm always around. Like we can always do that anytime. And we, you know, we had breakfast and we left. And then like 15 minutes later, he called me and he's like, actually, are you free for the next like hour? And I was like, I am actually. I was just going to a coffee shop and going to do some work. So he ended up meeting up with me, and that was like our first free writing session. And that was just a place where you didn't have to like sit down and listen to a beat and write a hot 16. Like we're in a coffee shop. We're just like writing what's on our mind and just like getting that muscle flexing in a way where it didn't have to be so show and prove. It's really just like for the sake of strengthening the creative muscle.
Right. And you're not so precious with the words.
Precisely. Yeah. And and none of it's you don't have to, you're not getting a grade at the end of it. You're not going to like put it up on YouTube at the end of it. You're just like, you're creating for the sake of creating and also just loosening up the, if you're feeling stuck. And it was through that process that I had been kind of like ideating for our next session when I came back and I was like, you just bought this Cadillac and it's like a really pretty car, but it doesn't run and you had to basically push it off the lot and you brought it in. I was like, this is kind of like a sick metaphor for being an independent artist. Like on the surface, it looks like, oh, you're doing it, you're balling, like whatever. And then on the inside, it's like the engine doesn't work. Like you can barely roll it off the lot. And I was like, this might be like a cool metaphor for a song. And so we did some free writing on that. And then like maybe a couple weeks later, he came back to me and he was like, I actually wrote 3 verses like about that. Do you want to come in and like maybe we can like try writing a hook? And then I was like, tight. And I was coming in being like, ooh, I want to be a professional songwriter. So I was like, I'm going to write a hook for like a pop star or something. I don't know. And so we ended up writing a hook for it. And, Ryan was like, oh, maybe we should just like do a voice note of it. And Ben was like, well, we're in the studio. You might as well just like go in and track it.
Oh my
And I was like, okay. So of course I like hop in. And then Ryan like is just so... He's just like Ryan is like nobody's like him creatively. Like he's just such a fucking freight train. So once I get in the studio, of course, you can't just casually record this idea. So of course now we're like doing crazy takes. Okay, try a harmony. Okay, actually now I think the harmony's the lead. So let's do the harmony 3 more times. So I'm in the studio and then, I walk out and I'm like, okay, we just like fully tracked that. Now I know in LA, like that's what I would do anyway, even if I knew the song was going to somebody else. Like you want it to sound when somebody's hearing the song and you're trying to sell them on whether, like they should take the song and they should, like use the song. You want it to sound as if it could go to radio tomorrow, but you're like, oh, I want my artist voice on it instead of this girl kind of thing.
Right.
But with this, like I ended up tracking it and they kept me on. And like that choice for them, let alone that choice for them to like bring me into the studio and work on the hook. And that choice to like, like record me in the booth instead of just doing a voice note. Like their choice to be like, no, we want Hollis to be on this. Like her voice will be good.
Yeah.
Even though I'm like, oh, I'm like, can I be a professional like recording artist? I have like a really crazy lisp and I don't know if I'm like the most virtuosic singer in X, Y, and Z. But it was really like, and they vouched for me from jump. I think Ben, like once he knew that I sang, like he always like was more than anything, like I just feel like working with them really emboldened me to feel like I could really do anything and that I could like be valued for it. So that's how White Walls came to be.
And that hook, that hook was amazing though. That is one of the best hooks of the era.
Oh, it's so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like they're so gifted, like, and it was such a pleasure to work with them on that. And then basically while with that everything was coming to pass and like everything was blowing up and they were like, we're shooting this video for Thrift Shop, and they kept like not like, whatever, I'm not trying to be rude, but they were kind of complaining to me about it. And I was like, do you need help? Like, do you need me to do this? Because you guys seem pretty fucking busy and you're trying to produce this music video. And they were like, yeah, okay. I was like, all right. And I was like, I want to do this. Like, this is something I really want to do. So I just like kind of started working, like even though they hadn't really like locked me in yet.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm going to call Goodwill and see like what's going on. Like I'm going to, value, we watched, like they literally, Macklemore and Ryan Lewis and their manager walked into Value Village where a lot of the video ended up being shot, and they were like, can we shoot here? And the manager was like, no. And I was like, no, I'm not taking that as an answer. And so I like called the like comms department, or I called like the, like somebody like the marketing and like communication department. And I was like, I have this opportunity to like collaborate with this and I just like sold like corporate on it. And then corporate was like, oh yeah, okay, we'll make it work. Right. So yeah, like I just loved the opportunity to step into a place of leadership in their team, and they do everything. Like they're the ones that, and now they own everything, which has also been like doubly inspiring. But they were always the creative center. They never had a creative director come in and tell them like where to be and how to look. Like they never had an executive producer come in and tell them like, okay, this beat's fire and this beat's trash, like that kind of thing. Like I remember when they met with L.A. Reid, like after the album had come out and everything had exploded, like L.A. Reid had told them in the meeting, like started the meeting with being like, if you had signed to our label, we would have totally fucked up your debut album.
Oh,
like there's
yeah.
no, like what you guys did, no label or A&R could have even remotely come close. Like their creativity would have been completely like bottlenecked and completely like
Well, they
compromised.
took 3 years. I mean, from what I've read anyway, they took 3 years to self-record, self-produce, self-publish, self-distribute the album. And so did you learn how to be that independent business-wise by being a part of that project?
Totally. And back to talking about Seattle versus LA, there was no other way to be. There's no other model. Like, especially if you're in rap, there's no way to do it except for do it by yourself. And it was kind of this like gloriously naive time that we lived in where it was just like, of course you would self-record yourself and self-produce yourself and self-publish yourself. And I mean, I think people weren't even thinking about publishing. Like self-distribute, you would like everything was independent because there was no other way to be. There's no corporate infrastructure. There's no label. Like this is not happening for rap. You know what I mean? And so it's like, this is who you are. Like you don't like, unless you want to move and be fake and like move to another city and like try to make it there or whatever, like that. I don't think we ever saw any successful like thing of that. Sir Mix-a-Lot rose to prominence because he was literally sitting on the bus going up and down Rainier selling mixtapes on the back of the bus. And then you got to know like, oh, if you want to get one of Sir Mix-a-Lot's tapes, you have to go find him at the back of the bus, or you have to go find him when he's pulling up and literally selling out the trunk. And that was our biggest like hip hop success in Seattle. And he literally was self-made and now is self-published. So it's like, and obviously you had to partner with a label at the time because there was no other way that you were going to get on radio or like whatever. But, like he was the prototype and he was as independent as you can be. So like that wasn't extraordinary. Do you know what I mean? Like what's extraordinary is that like these two guys, and I would say like I had never seen two people work as hard as they did and be so consumed and with such belief in their vision, like that singular like obsession, like obsessive creativity. That was them to a T. And it they invested all of their best and waking creative hours in like that project. And I was like, that is the power of believing and the power of time, like beyond like 10,000 hours, like far beyond, you know what I mean? And being able to be there and to be in service of that and to learn and soak up game, like, yeah, totally transformed the way that I understood what was possible.
So how did you learn the business aspect of it as it pertained to you and your own interests? Because you used the word, you hadn't been locked in yet when you were working with them on some of these videos and these ideas. So it sounds like you're helping them creatively. You're part of their team.
Mm-hmm.
They're respecting your ideas and incorporating you into their work plan. But how do you protect yourself and get paid and make sure that you're treated fairly in that process?
I mean, the first video I made for Wings, it was a volunteer position. I made no dollars, which is like when I look back at how much work I did and like knowing now like what a day rate would have been for me as a line producer or as like a coordinator or like casting and just like all this stuff that I ended up doing, like it's wild. But it's like, yeah. And then like with the thrift shop video, I got paid like $1,000 as a producer for a
Oh
plantation.
my goodness. For
And
getting
that
them
was like tight to me. And frankly, I was the number 2 highest paid person on set.
You made Value Village happen, man.
I mean, whatever. But I think, but it came back 100-fold in other ways. So it's like, it's like kind of like, I think about the concept of karmic yoga.
Yeah.
And like the idea of like doing things in service and in practice and that, just being an investment in self and like really finding the value inherently in that work. And like I would have, I did the first video for free because it was so valuable to me to be part of that process and to do something that I had never done before and to work with people who inspired me. And it was so, and I will also say this, I had the great privilege of having a full ride scholarship to college. So I didn't have student debt. If I had had student debt, there's probably no way that I'd be doing what I'm doing now because that would have been so inhibiting to me and I couldn't have taken the opportunity while I was working my like shitty part-time nonprofit job to like invest myself fully into this other creative venture. Like I wouldn't have had the ability to do that. So I think for me, like, learning how to protect myself and to value myself is an ongoing question. It's an ongoing conversation that I have. But I think in that process, and like because we ascended to such a height where like, oh, okay, now I'm learning what publishing is for the first time. I'm learning what music copyright is for the first time. I'm learning what a publishing rights organization does and the way that they pay out royalties and how to protect yourself there, and the fact that I need to like run my publishing company and like, do I need to sign with a publisher? What's an admin deal versus a co-publishing deal? All these things, like all of the stuff that I've learned since then, like it was definitely catalyzed from working with them, but we were all learning about it together because they hadn't achieved that kind of success either, and they didn't know how you treat side artists or how you like distribute publishing in a fair way, or like the correct rate to pay somebody when you guys are going on the road and you're just building up the debt that you had amassed from like self-producing and self-publishing your project, and you're not going to get paid for another 9 months because it takes 3 quarters for those royalties to hit. It's just like, it's such like a fraught world, and none of us knew what the fuck we were doing in it. And so like, and it was a learning process. I think everybody would acknowledge in that, like it was a clumsy learning process.
Right.
But I think we all, I know I feel like I got to the point where like I learned what it was to assert myself. I learned what it was to have difficult conversations. I learned what it was to assert like value, and to understand, like, and to read a contract and to be able to be like, okay, if I don't understand what this means, then I have a right to understand it, versus just like gaily signing on the dotted line and being like, I'm so thankful to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think we're all at a place now where we're, you know, obviously much more educated. But I'm at a place where I really feel a lot more empowered. You know, we all did this because of like creative and independent experimentation. And so now like my charge and like what I'm really passionate about is artist education, and for artists to better understand how the mechanisms of the music industry work, and or any creative industry, and how best to protect yourself.
Well, and also, you know, going back to the work that you did for free or for very little on that project, you did have your name specifically listed on the Grammy nomination, and you got all these, you know, and I think that the karma has definitely paid off for you. It sounds like.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally. I mean, I would say I'm so grateful. I mean, like, and it completely transformed my life in a number of different ways. And again, there was like insane highs, there's insane lows. Like there's lots of dark nights of the soul for everybody. Yeah. You know, but I think, you know, ultimately just knowing like every experience is meant to inform the next step you take. So
yeah. And I saw a TED talk that you did for University of Washington TEDx, and you talked about your mom. Can you tell us what she means to you in terms of your journey and how you got to where you're at today?
Totally. So my mom is just like a really amazing, resilient woman. She moved to the United States by herself when she was 19 years old and just like made it work. And when I was growing up, like when she was pregnant with me, actually, she had just purchased a Chinese restaurant in our like small suburb in the San Francisco Bay Area called Petaluma. And I basically grew up in the restaurant that she owned and then she ran. And, you know, now looking back on it, I'm like, wow, how amazing. Like I, you know, come from like an immigrant, you know, my mother is an immigrant. She is an entrepreneur. She's like such a strong, forthright woman who's so confident in herself and leads. And, you know, it was really amazing to also grow up in a place where like it's about hospitality and feeding people and bringing people together around food. So it was this really incredible environment to kind of nourish me. And yeah, I mean, my mom has always like believed in me. Like she's always believed in me, obviously. And she was the person who really gave me access to arts education and encouraged me to pursue singing, pursue theater. She always like really believed in me as a performer. And I think my path deviated a lot from what I think her ideals were at the time in terms of what performance looked like. Like, can't say she was a super big fan of spoken word and like me using mining my personal experiences for content. Yeah. You know, can't say she was a super big fan when I started rapping and like was like pulling up to these little like tiny clubs and restaurants performing, like, you know, but obviously, you know, once the person that her daughter's working with is in People magazine, then everything's chill. And once I can like bring her as my date to the Grammys, then we're okay.
Red carpet.
Yeah. And I think ultimately my mom really showed me what it was to be like an entrepreneur, to be like a really strong woman, and to be a woman that like wouldn't take no for an answer, that wouldn't accept setbacks as defeats. And, you know, I, again, like, my path deviated so kind of like away from, I think, what her ideal was for me. But at the same time, it's like it's because of the foundation and the sacrifices that she made that gave me the opportunity to develop and explore as a creative person. And she still continues to support me in that.
You've talked about your 17-year-old self a little bit today. If you could go back and talk to your 17-year-old self, what would you tell her, and what advice would you give her?
I think what I would tell my 17-year-old self is like, you don't need other people to make you great. You're great on your own. And I think like one thing that I wish that I had developed more as a young person is just my creative autonomy. Like, you don't need other people to be creative. You don't need other people to tell you that you're doing a good job for you to do good work. And yeah, I mean, I'm just like, I would like in this hypothetical game, like I wouldn't want to say enough to like have myself change courses radically, obviously, because I'm so grateful for the course that I've taken. But I think like I want my 17-year-old self to know that like what's possible is so much bigger than what you are even dreaming for yourself right now.
And what did you study in college?
History.
And was there any point when you were studying history where you were like, I'm going to be a history professor? Or,
definitely.
Yeah.
When I graduated from college, I was like, I'll probably take a couple years and then try to pursue a PhD.
And then what changed?
The rap game. I don't know. I just got consumed by doing my own thing. Like I saw life in academia for myself and I was interested in it. But I think ultimately I developed a critique of the academic industrial complex. And I also just really fell in love with the idea of creating a new path for myself and being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And if you were standing in front of a group of 17-year-old kids who are wanting to work in the arts, whatever that may be, whatever that means, performance arts or painting or music, what would your advice be to them? And say these are middle America kids, they're not in big cities.
Sure.
They're, rural Kansas or, southern Louisiana.
I'd be like, don't be racist. I'm just kidding. I would say, like, you have to try a lot of stuff to know what most speaks to you. And so don't ever inhibit your ability to grow or to experiment and to try. And you can't wait around for permission to develop as a creative. You can't wait around for somebody to give you like a smile and a nod and tell you to walk forward. Like, the best way to go is to find that smile and your nod within yourself and to find that internal affirmation to believe that you're worthy of developing as a creative.
Thanks for your time today and sharing your story, your journey.
Well, thank you for asking me about it. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Dreampath podcast. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to your favorite podcast service and give me a rating and review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. I appreciate your time, and as always, go find your dream path.